Do you have sex? Do you know people who have sex? Perhaps they're not enjoying their sex enough. Is it good sex? Is it ethical sex? These are the kinds of questions we want to learn more about. I have with me today Dr. Valerie Peterson, who's very excited about her new book here. Woohoo! She's very excited. It's called Sex, Ethics, and Communication.
With the V, with the V in the middle, so you don't get the cupcake lady.
The question that we have right here, I know, pressing minds, we want to know.
Pressing minds.
Pressing minds. We want to know who should read this book. Why should they read it? What will they find?
Young people should read this book.
Why?
Yes, young adults who can handle candid discussion about sexuality. There are some words in there that are honest. Why should they read it?
Yeah, why do they want to read this book?
Well, because it's trying to be pretty forthright. It is trying to give you some ways of thinking about what you're doing when you're being intimate with other people. And there's a lot of stuff out there that is, bad advice. There's a lot of bad stuff on TV, shows people doing dumb things, and kind of ends you up in a bad place. And so smart people.
What do you think keeps those people who are not having good sex from having good sex? I mean, if most people out there don't have good sex, I don't know. Okay.
A lot of people aren't having sex at all, which is probably
wise. Those people who are not having good sex.
Yeah.
What would your book tell them to help them improve their sex life?
Well, part of it is you have to be about sex the way you are about other projects that matter to you, other things that matter to you, other art forms that matter to you. If you really care about,
So you have to make it a regular part of your life.
Well, you have to think about it like you think about other things. It's not like some magical thing. You're going to find the perfect person who knows all of the things that are going to make you feel good, and it's not going to be something you're going to have to figure out, or that they're not some issues that you're going to have to work through or sort out. If you're going to be lazy about intimacy, you're going to have a lousy time. The same way that if you're lazy about practicing the piano, you're probably never going to learn how to play.
Right.
And you're going to hate playing.
Right.
Because you're never going to be good at it. You're never going to enjoy it. You're never going to figure out how to do it well enough to have it be fun.
So how is the ethics come in here? I mean, why is
because you're doing it with somebody else. It's not a piano. You're with a
okay,
partner.
so we'll talk about it in both ways there. Okay, so in the first one you were talking about it potentially all by yourself.
Well, I mean, I don't really talk that much about.
Well, explain that though. I mean, the difference of one's sexuality versus the ethics of the sexuality.
Well, to me, when I'm talking about
how does all that come together?
Well, that's too huge of a question. But I mean, to be ethical with somebody else means to be concerned about their welfare as well as your own. I mean, it's being concerned about your own well-being and to be concerned about other people's well-being.
Can people have good sex that isn't ethical sex?
Not in the way that I'm defining what good is. I mean, a lot of times people think of good sex as, the one time that they had sex where it was really great back a long time ago with this person who
that was the good sex.
Never have it again, and that was that thing or that time in high school, or the time that I went was the exchange student in Germany. I don't know, whatever. There's that kind of way of talking about good sex, and then or they think of it as some kind of fantasy future thing that they hope to someday find. It's just going to sort of land on them and be perfect and easy and all of that. And so it's either something in the past that will never happen again, or it's something in the future that they hope to someday find, that it's like an Easter egg, you don't have to, there's nothing about it that makes it something you're actually doing with another person. It's some kind of magical thing. They're just going to find the perfect person and it's all going to unfold as it should. And I mean, there's a lot of fantasy that talks about intimacy that way. When you see it on TV, they find each other, and it's perfect, and they have the sexual interlude, and it's wonderful, and they don't use contraception, or they don't, nobody has a sexually transmitted disease, and there's all these kinds of things. It doesn't help people in real life accomplish a really fun sex life, really good sex life, because there's too many other things in real life that are part of it. Well, some people want to go, I don't want to think about that.
Give us a couple other topics or issues or things that get discussed in the book that would help those who are thinking about the book. Why? I mean, again, books are expensive. they want to decide whether to buy the book. What are some of the
in the part that talks about ethics? There's a chapter on vulnerability, and it talks about how all humans are vulnerable, and also how male bodies and female bodies are slightly differently vulnerable. So, there's some ways in which we're all vulnerable. Somebody can cut you with a knife and you bleed. It doesn't matter if you're male or female, you're vulnerable to these kinds of things. But there's also things that are special to particular bodies. If you have a male body or female body, there can be slight differences in the ways that you're vulnerable, like being vulnerable to an unintended pregnancy is something that it happens to a woman's body. Both men can get pulled into it, obviously, because of DNA testing and these kinds of things, or just even because they're concerned. So there are sort of these different vulnerabilities that end up having consequences for people in intimacy. If women have a menstrual cycle, sometimes that factors into their willingness or unwillingness or comfort or discomfort with intimacy. It's something it helps if you register that, so that you don't think it's just mysterious, that sometimes she's just not interested in you.
Right. And so what do you think is the most controversial claim you make in the book?
I don't think there's anything particularly.
Oh, come on, there's something controversial. I mean,
well, I think that in the last section, when I'm talking about different ways that sex plays out in the culture, I have one chapter called 2 out of 3, where I basically make the argument that I think in the 70s, some of the attempt for women to have it all, where you can have a career and you can have children and you can have a great husband relationship with your significant other. I argue that in some cases, like 2 out of 3 is probably more possible to do well than 3 out of 3. There's very few women I know that are both fantastic mothers, fantastic partners to their significant other, and fantastic career women. I mean, not just having a job, but
two of those 3 is doing pretty good.
Well, I think maybe if people just lightened up on themselves, because they used to say, well, how come men can have it all?
Well, they don't, because when the guy catches the touchdown, he goes, "Hi, Mom."
Well, yeah, and because
Mother's Day is a big deal,
right? Because men traditionally were the career and then maybe the wife, but they didn't spend as much time with the children, or they spent time with the children, but they didn't have that much of a relationship.
Okay,
with the
but
wife.
Before you said that the book was basically for young people, and so it's for young people who maybe either haven't had sex or have been an initial partner or experimenting, but it's also for potentially people who are going through a divorce and maybe re-entering the market.
I mean, it could be someone who just hasn't had sex yet and is thinking about it, and what maybe they want to wait until they get married. But just because you get married, that doesn't solve problems of intimacy, because you still have to be in conversation with your partner. Or it could be someone like, let's say you got married young to a high school sweetheart or whatever, and then a couple years later you get divorced, and now you're in this dating scene that seems very bizarre to you. You don't really know how to deal with the way people are treating each other, and so it might be useful for a person in that situation too, because you're still sort of in the realm of, maybe I want to have physical intimacy with people, but maybe I'm not sure how I'm going to set boundaries, if I'm going to set boundaries, and try to decide how to get back into that world.
And so if people do have a course that they're teaching and they happen to see this video, they can contact Cognella, the publisher, and ask for a review copy for that. And
yes, most definitely. And
I mean, a complimentary copy.
Depending on the instructor, some people who teach interpersonal communication might want to have a unit on sexuality. People who teach gender communication might want to talk about sexuality. People who teach sexuality classes, some of those textbooks are just horrid. They're very dry and they're not very humane. And you get done with this, and they're like $100, and you're going, what am I learning with this? Body parts and things like that. So this would be probably a good supplemental to something like that, and other courses. Some people are now teaching sexuality and communication courses because I think there's a lot of issues, especially with young people. They're very good at Facebooking and texting and all this kind of stuff. But what happens when you actually set your cell phone down? Leave it in another room, and you're dealing with face-to-face and actual flesh, and you need to negotiate the sensitive territories in ways that you can't just go delete or whatever. When you have issues, you're still face-to-face with the person that you're encountering. So it's that's the one territory where you kind of can't get around the body. I'm not talking about cyber sex or any of that kind of stuff. I'm talking about sort of the real life engagement, which some
Right.
people are still interested in. You know, when
Right.
people are not interested in that anymore, when they can live completely through their pornography or completely through their sexual video games or their little robot.
They don't need the book.
They
But those
won't.
people who still want to enjoy the flesh of themselves and or other people,
Yeah.
this is the book for them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just for those who are clinging to that notion. Yeah.
Well, very good. And we will put links down in the below bar for places where people can find those.
Yes.
Okay, bye-bye.